On a dimly lit estate in East London, a group of young men in designer jackets eye every passing stranger with quiet menace. "You don't want to be hanging around here," one finally mutters to an outsider, a cold warning cutting through the silence. This is the Gascoigne estate in Barking, Hellbanian's territory. Outsiders are unwelcome, and after dark, the normal rules of London life don't seem to apply. Here, the street belongs to a new breed of gangland power. Albanian gangsters who have seized control of these blocks and beyond, enforcing their rule with a mix of seductive wealth and brute violence. Hellbanians is an Albanian street crew infamous in this part of London. By day, the estate looks like any other low-income housing project. By night, it's a fortress of the gang's making. Years ago, local residents began noticing flashy sports cars, Ferraris and Lamborghinis, rolling through the narrow streets. The gang's members, many just in their 20s, proudly flaunted wads of 50 notes and gold Rolexes. They didn't hide in the shadows, instead they preened on social media, posting slick music videos on YouTube and Instagram. In these clips, masked young men draped in gold chains rap in Albanian about loyalty and violence, showing off wheel-spinning Bentleys and scattering stacks of cash. In one video, a drone camera soars over the very tower blocks they govern before cutting to scenes of gang members surrounding a Metropolitan Police patrol car, a brazen display of contempt for authority. Before the police and tech companies shut it down, the Hellbanians' Instagram account had over 100,000 followers tuning in to see this outlaw lifestyle. The message was unmistakable. Hellbanians are ready for war, armed with AK-47s. The gang likes to brag about their Kalash, slang for Kalashnikov rifles, and backed by an army of soldiers on the streets. Locals have learned to keep their heads down. The Gascoigne estate wasn't always under Albanian control. Back in the mid-1990s, it was a different world. The estate was ruled by old-school British crime families. Outsiders, especially people of color, risked a beating if they wandered in. Later, a Jamaican gang led by a fearsome boss nicknamed the King, Delroy Lewis, ran a 24/7 open drug market on these blocks, slinging crack cocaine and heroin at all hours. That operation was ruthless and efficient until Lewis's luck ran out. He was taken down and jailed in 2004, leaving a power vacuum on the estate. By that time, the neighborhood's demographics were changing. An influx of refugees from Albania and Kosovo had arrived, fleeing war and chaos in the Balkans. Albanian soon became the second most spoken language around here. And with their community growing and the previous gang boss gone, a new generation of immigrant gangsters saw their opportunity. It wasn't long after Delroy's downfall that the Albanian flag was metaphorically planted on the Gascoigne. A crew of young Albanians gradually took over the local drug trade and underworld activities. They called themselves Hellbanians, a name that blended their heritage with a street-hardened identity, and they established a stranglehold on the estate. Rookwood House, a graffiti-covered high-rise block nearby, became their headquarters. Its design was perfect for a gang's purposes. Interlocking walkways and a limited number of entry points made it easy to secure against police raids or rival incursions. Lookouts could spot trouble coming from a distance. Inside those concrete corridors, Hellbanians members could organize their business, stash drugs and weapons, and retreat to safety after making a quick sale on the corner. For years, Rookwood House stood as a symbol of their dominance, even appearing as the backdrop in one of their music videos, until a city redevelopment plan finally saw the tower demolished. But even that didn't weaken Hellbanians. The gang simply shifted operations to a new base a short walk away, near a pub that locals quietly avoid once night falls. Every night around 9 p.m., witnesses say the same crew of faces gathers there, ready to conduct business. Hellbanians has become embedded in the fabric of this community, at times seeming like a part of the local culture, albeit a dark and dangerous part. The hallmark of Hellbanians and their peers is a mix of ostentation and intimidation. They recruit heavily from the Albanian youths in London, especially those who see few other opportunities or who are drawn by the promise of fast cars and easy money. The gang's flashy presence, the social media posts, the music boasting of their exploits, isn't just for ego. It's deliberate propaganda aimed at luring youngers, fresh recruits who are impressed by the gangster glamour. In their videos and posts, Hellbanian's members refer to new recruits as falcons, a romanticized term for the foot soldiers eager to fly high on the proceeds of crime. It's a seductive trap. Teenagers are enticed with designer clothes, stacks of cash to fan their faces with, maybe a chance to hold a high-powered motorbike or pose with a pretty girl from the videos. They don't see the brutal reality that lies beneath, at least not until they're in too deep. The truth is that life in this gang is as disposable as the next kid in line. Anyone who betrays the group or fails to follow orders risks severe punishment, if not a beating or stabbing, then possibly a worse fate. And if rivals encroach on their turf, Hellbanians have made it clear they will respond with violence. Their lyrics and online posts openly threaten other gangs. They've even taunted a rival Albanian outfit known as OTR, short for On Top of the Rest, daring them to clash. It's all carefully curated to project an aura of invincibility on the streets of London. What many casual onlookers don't realize, however, is that Hellbanians is only the street-level face of a much larger beast. These young men embarking are effectively the foot soldiers and enforcers of what is sometimes called the Mafia Shqiptare, the Albanian Mafia, an organized crime network that extends far beyond this one estate. Over the past 2 decades, Albanian organized crime groups have systematically taken over key parts of Britain's underworld economy. They are not the only foreign criminals in London, of course, but their rise has been particularly spectacular. Once dismissed as newcomers, they are now considered one of the most powerful criminal fraternities operating in the UK. The National Crime Agency, Britain's equivalent of the FBI, has warned that Albanian gangs have consolidated power rapidly, to the point of nearing a monopoly over the UK's £5 billion a year cocaine trade. From the shipping ports of Europe to the housing projects of London, one criminal network with roots in the Western Balkans has muscled its way to the top of the drug supply chain. To understand how this happened, one has to look back at the history that forged these gangsters. Many of the key players came of age in the 1990s during tumultuous times in Albania and neighboring Kosovo. Those years were marked by economic collapse, lawlessness, and even civil conflict. Young men from that part of the world grew up amid chaos. Some fought in the Kosovo War or survived violent disorder at home, and they carried the hard lessons of that era with them. When Albania's communist regime fell and the country was plunged into poverty and instability, criminal enterprises flourished. A culture of survival at any cost took root. In that environment, codes of honor and clan loyalty remained strong but were applied to new endeavors: smuggling, black market deals, and organized crime. One concept Albanians prize is besa, meaning keeping a promise or trust. Among the gangsters, this translates into a reputation for reliability. If an Albanian crime boss strikes a deal, he will deliver on it. That earned them credit and partnerships in the underworld. At the same time, an older tradition called the Kanun, an eye for an eye honor code that sanctions deadly revenge for betrayals, means these gangsters are also feared. Cross them and retribution can be fatal, not just for the offender, but potentially for their family back home. This mix of dependable loyalty to allies and merciless vengeance against enemies proved to be a potent formula in the criminal underworld. It allowed Albanian networks to form strong alliances and discouraged others from double-crossing them. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, as Albania's economy struggled, many ambitious young men looked westward for opportunity. Some emigrated legally or claimed asylum. Others were smuggled illegally into countries like Italy, Belgium, and the UK. London, with its booming economy and established crime networks, was an attractive destination. The Albanians arrived to find certain illicit markets already dominated by others. For instance, the sex trade in London had players from various nationalities. But the newcomers were cunning and highly organized. They started making their mark by focusing on the underbelly of the night economy: prostitution and vice. With frightening speed, Albanian gangs seized control of brothels across various UK cities, ousting or absorbing the competition. Through a combination of charm and brutality, they became the new pimps and madams behind closed doors. Countless Eastern European women Some from Albania itself, others from countries like Romania, Lithuania, or Slovakia, found themselves trafficked by these networks. Many were lured with false promises of legitimate work as waitresses or cleaners in England, only to have their passports seized and their bodies sold in backstreet flats and massage parlors. The Albanian crime groups proved especially ruthless in this arena. If a woman disobeyed, she could be beaten or raped into submission. Victims were passed like commodities from one gang member to another, sometimes sold for a price between pimps. Police operations in the 2000s uncovered terrifying cases. Women held captive, abused, and forced to have sex with dozens of men a day under threats of violence. In one notorious case, a 16-year-old girl was tricked into coming to London and endured over a year in sexual slavery, shuttled between brothels run by an Albanian-led gang. When that ring was finally busted, the judge described it as slavery, alive and well. The pattern was clear. Albanian gangs were willing to exploit the most vulnerable, impoverished young women in this instance to build their criminal enterprises. It was a sign of things to come, but it was the drug trade that truly elevated the power of Albanian gangs in London. By the early 2010s, they had shifted much of their focus from prostitution to narcotics, and in particular to cocaine. The timing was strategic. Demand for cocaine in the UK has always been high, from city bankers snorting lines in club bathrooms to street dealers pushing crack rocks on corner blocks. Traditionally, the cocaine business in Britain involved a chain of different groups. South American cartels would get the product to Europe, Dutch or Belgian wholesalers would distribute it, and various British gangs, from Liverpudlian crime families to West Indian yardies or local London crews, would handle retail on the streets. It was an old system with many middlemen and a lot of markups along the way. The Albanians saw an opportunity to upend that entire model, and they took it. Sometime around the late 2000s, enterprising Albanian kingpins did something unprecedented. They negotiated directly with the Colombian and Latin American cartels, producing the cocaine. Cutting out the long-time Dutch wholesalers, the Albanians arranged massive shipments of cocaine to be delivered straight from South America to Europe, often through ports they had connections in. Suddenly, they weren't just street dealers, they were importers. In doing so, they achieved two major advantages over every other dealer in Britain. First, they got the cocaine at rock-bottom prices. While other gangs might have been paying over $20,000 for a kilo of coke via middlemen, the Albanians could get that same kilo for perhaps $4,000 to $5,000 by going straight to the source. Second, they ensured the purity of their product remained high. No more heavily cut, weak cocaine, they were bringing in high-purity bricks, then distributing them with only minimal dilution. This meant that on the street, Albanian-supplied cocaine was both cheaper and stronger than what competitors were selling. For drug users and lower-level dealers, that combination was irresistibly profitable. It was a revolution in the UK underworld. Virtually overnight, Albanian networks undercut their rivals and won a huge share of the market. If you were a small-time dealer in London by the 2010s, chances are your supplier's supplier was Albanian. The Mafia Shqiptar had, in effect, become the new wholesale club for cocaine, and they did it while maintaining tight control. Albanian gangs don't just import the drugs and hand them off. They often control the whole supply chain from port to point of sale. It's a vertically integrated business model. One crew oversees the smuggling from, say, Latin America to a port in Belgium or Spain. Another branch handles trucking it clandestinely into the UK, perhaps hidden in shipments of produce or building materials. Yet another faction deals with breaking it down and distributing to regional managers, and street-level teams like Hellbanians push it to customers and enforce territory. By owning each step, they maximize profit and minimize dependence on outsiders. The extent of their operation occasionally flashes into public view when a big police bust goes down. In early 2021, for example, an astonishing discovery was made at Portsmouth Port. Border Force officers inspected what looked like a regular shipment of bananas from Colombia, but hidden among the pallets of fruit were dense packages of cocaine, 2.7 tons of it in total, with a potential street value north of 200 million. It was one of the largest cocaine seizures in UK history. Investigators soon learned that an Albanian-led crime group was behind this shipment. The gang had even acquired a legitimate fruit import company in London, using it as a front to bring in drug-laden cargoes. They planned to distribute the coke all across London and beyond, dividing it up by batches marked with unique stamps corresponding to different customer gangs. When armed NCA officers raided a warehouse in Tottenham to intercept the delivery, they found members of the smuggling crew frantically tearing through banana boxes, desperately searching for the missing cocaine they thought had slipped past customs. The gang had prepared dozens of empty cardboard boxes to conceal the drugs for further transport, and even had a stash of suitcases ready, likely to be filled with cash profits. Hidden in the rafters of the warehouse, the police found a firearm and ammunition, evidence that this was a highly organized and dangerous outfit. Among those arrested were multiple Albanian nationals, alongside a couple of associates from other countries. A reminder that while the Albanian Mafia often works within its own ethnicity, it's not averse to partnering with anyone who can facilitate the business. Stories like that banana shipment bust highlight both the ambition and the international reach of these gangs. The tentacles of the Albanian Mafia extend from the coca fields of South America to the docks of Antwerp and Dover, and from the council estates of London to high-end European casinos where profits might be laundered. They move with a blend of old-school gangsterism and modern high-tech savvy. On one hand, they rely on trusted familial bonds and face-to-face meetings, cementing deals with a handshake and their word, Besa. On the other, they embrace encryption technology to coordinate crime. A recent law enforcement operation revealed just how deeply embedded Albanian traffickers were in the clandestine communications networks used by organized crime. In 2020, European police hacked into an encrypted phone system called EncroChat, which was a secret text messaging network favored by drug lords and gun runners across the continent. The results were explosive. Millions of hidden messages were suddenly visible to authorities, and a slew of raids followed. In the UK, Operation Venetic targeted dozens of major criminals identified through EncroChat, and many of them were Albanians. One was a 33-year-old man named Bujar Kosminka, living inconspicuously on a busy high street in Wembley, northwest London. Kosminka was no street dealer. He was a logistics man for an Albanian organized crime group, coordinating multi-million-pound drug deals from behind an innocuous front door. When armed officers finally arrested Kosminka in May 2021, they found nearly £300,000 in cash hidden across two of his properties. Ledgers discovered on-site detailed an illicit business moving at least 100 kilograms of cocaine, worth around $8 million on the street, and laundering roughly $2.5 million in dirty money. Kosminka had been operating under a pseudonymous handle, Insatiable Beta, as he brokered deals via encrypted texts, confident that the police could never read his messages. He arranged narcotics shipments around the country and moved hundreds of thousands of pounds weekly, all while London was under the quiet of COVID lockdowns. Unbeknownst to him, investigators were watching his every text in real time once EncroChat was cracked. When the case finally came to court, the evidence was overwhelming. Faced with transcripts of his own boasts and orders, Kosminka pleaded guilty. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison in 2024. A hefty sentence, but perhaps a small price in the context of the empire he was helping to run. Astonishingly, this wasn't Kosminka's first run-in with British law. He had been caught nearly a decade earlier for similar crimes, convicted in 2012 for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. After that conviction, he was deported to Albania, only to quietly slip back into the UK under a false identity or hidden amongst the waves of illegal entrants to resume business. That determination to defy law enforcement and the ease with which he returned underscore the challenge authorities face. For every Kosminka taken off the streets, there may be another to fill his role, sometimes even the same individual returning for a second round. The higher echelons of the Albanian Mafia remain notoriously hard to reach. While foot soldiers like Hellbanians flash their bling and occasionally get busted in spectacular police operations, the true kingpins often maintain a much lower profile. Some are believed to operate from abroad, coordinating shipments and finances from safe havens in continental Europe or even back in Albania. where they can live in fortified luxury with their ill-gotten wealth. They use layers of intermediaries and counter-surveillance techniques to stay a step ahead of the cops. And due to that code of silence and loyalty, flipping an Albanian gang member to become an informant is exceedingly rare. These guys know that betrayal could bring lethal consequences, not just for themselves, but for their relatives back home. It's been noted that the old generation of Albanian crime lords actually frowned upon the flashy antics of Hellbanians, precisely because it threatened to draw attention to their far larger, more profitable operations. These older bosses would rather the business of drug trafficking and money laundering carry on quietly, embedded in the city's fabric, without Instagram or YouTube alerting the world to their presence. Still, even the most discreet criminal enterprise has real repercussions, and in the case of Albanian gangs in London, the impact on communities has been profound. They have effectively controlled the streets in certain districts, not in an overt political sense, but through fear and influence. Neighborhoods like the one around Gascoigne Estate have residents who feel that an invisible hand determines what happens after dark. Which corners are safe, who can sell drugs where, and who gets punished for stepping out of line. The gangs also siphon wealth out of these communities. Money from local addicts, or from young people drawn into dealing, flows upward into the criminal coffers and often overseas. And there's another dark side. These networks exploit vulnerable communities at every step of their operation, both in the UK and back in their homeland. Consider the pipeline that brings an Albanian gang member from a village in the Balkans to a street corner in London. It often starts with a lie. In remote towns of Albania, where jobs are scarce and hope even scarcer, whispers spread of opportunities in England. Sometimes it's a local fixer, maybe someone who himself spent time in Britain, who tells impressionable young men that they can make a fortune across the channel. In recent years, this recruitment has gone digital. On TikTok and other social media, flashy videos targeted at Albanian youth have glorified the journey to the UK. One clip that circulated showed a small boat speeding across a choppy sea toward the white cliffs of Dover, emblazoned with the caption, "Fuck school, let's take the boat to England." It's a brazen marketing ploy by the smugglers. Ditch your humble life, come get rich in the land of opportunity. What they don't advertise is the price of the trip, often thousands of pounds, and the strings attached. By 2022, an unprecedented number of Albanians were appearing on England's southern shores in flimsy inflatable boats, part of the wider migrant crisis. Many were immediately claiming asylum, citing persecution or danger back home. While some of those claims were genuine, Albania has issues like blood feud violence, domestic abuse, and anti-LGBT persecution that can make life dangerous for certain individuals. A portion of these arrivals were effectively foot soldiers in waiting for the gangs. British officials noticed a pattern. Organized criminal groups had embedded themselves in the migrant routes. Albanian gangs were operating around the migrant camps in northern France, offering passage to the UK for those who couldn't afford it, in exchange for a future debt. Young men who agreed to these terms often didn't realize exactly what awaited them. They might have thought they'd work construction or some job to pay off what they owed the smugglers. The reality was often more grim. Once in Britain, cut off from family and hiding from authorities, these men found the smugglers transformed into their handlers. They were told they had debts running into tens of thousands of pounds, far more than the original cost of the journey, padded with brutal interest. To repay it, they had two choices: either toil in the underground economy for slave wages or directly involve themselves in the gang's criminal enterprises. The journey through Europe was harrowing, packed in lorries, hiding in safe houses, and finally a dangerous nighttime boat ride across the channel. There are many young Albanian men invisible in plain sight across the UK, washing cars, working on construction sites for cash, guarding cannabis grows in suburban houses, effectively indentured to the criminal networks that brought them in. They blend in because they're mostly white and speak a bit of English. People assume they're just another migrant worker from Eastern Europe, maybe Polish or Romanian. But in reality, they are victims of trafficking, every bit as much under the thumb of their employers as a woman in a brothel or a child in a sweatshop. The Albanian gangs exploit these men viciously, knowing they won't go to the police. They're too scared and often ineligible to stay legally. One charity worker in London remarked that the levels of violence and intimidation used by these traffickers are shocking. She said it's hard to comprehend how brutally the young men are treated, because people normally associate trafficking with women and sexual exploitation, not with adult males doing manual labor. Yet here it is. Modern slavery, hidden behind the facade of normal odd jobs. Then there are the women. Decades after first muscling into the sex trade, Albanian crime groups are still deeply involved in pimping and human trafficking for sexual exploitation. A woman named Zana, not her real name, tells a familiar story. She was approached in Tirana with an offer to work as a nanny in London. Desperate to improve her life, she agreed and was slipped into Britain with a fake passport. The moment she arrived, the nightmare began. Her handlers took her documents and beat her. She was told she'd be working off a huge debt. Zana ended up in a massage parlor in Soho, forced to serve up to a dozen men a day, never seeing a penny of the money. Whenever she resisted, her pimp, an Albanian man who had himself once been an exploited teen in the drug trade before earning a promotion to running girls, burned her with cigarettes. It took months before police, acting on a tip, raided the place and freed her. By then, the damage, physical and psychological, was done. Zana was just one of many. In cities across Europe, Albanian-run prostitution rings have been busted, where women from all over Eastern Europe, including Albania's own rural areas, were kept in inhumane conditions. It's another way these gangs prey on the hopes of the vulnerable. Every person who dreams of a better life can be a tool for them. Whether that's a young man who thinks he can strike it rich selling drugs, or a young woman who thinks she's getting a legitimate job abroad. The common denominator is the exploitation of desperation. Even within the UK, Albanian gangsters find ways to exploit local vulnerabilities. They've been known to recruit British teens as well, especially runaways or kids from troubled homes, to work as street dealers or drug couriers. The rise of the Albanian cocaine importers actually made things hotter on the streets for a lot of British gangs. Suddenly, cocaine was everywhere, cheaper and purer than ever, and smaller UK gangs saw they could make quick profits selling it in their neighbourhoods or through so-called county lines, the practice of urban gangs sending young dealers to rural towns to flood those areas with drugs. Gun violence and knife crime ticked up in various cities as turf wars flared over this lucrative trade. In one particularly tragic incident in 2019, a 14-year-old boy named Jaden was murdered in a gang-related attack in East London, an area where, officials noted, the competition over the coke business had become fierce after prices dropped. While Jaden's death wasn't directly tied to Albanians, the police suspected that the volatility in the local drug scene, spurred by the influx of high-grade cocaine from the Albanian pipelines, created an environment where younger and younger kids were getting sucked into deadly feuds. It's a ripple effect of the Albanians' stranglehold on the drug supply. By making coke widely available and relatively cheap, they inadvertently empowered countless smaller criminal outfits to get into the trade, many of whom employed youths as runners. Those youths became both perpetrators and victims of new rounds of violence. Essentially, the criminal monopoly has trickled down mayhem into some of Britain's most deprived communities. Law enforcement in London and throughout the UK is painfully aware of the problem. The National Crime Agency has a dedicated unit working on Albanian organised crime, and police forces have upped collaboration with European partners. There have been successes, like the banana shipment interception, like the EncroChat takedowns, like numerous raids on cannabis farms and brothels that saved trafficked victims from hellish conditions. The NCA and Metropolitan Police have even run joint operations, storming cafes and social clubs in London suspected of being hubs for people smuggling gangs. In one recent series of dawn raids, officers targeted an Albanian-run network that was advertising illegal channel crossings on social media. They arrested several suspects in London, 3 Albanian men and a woman from Eastern Europe, who were allegedly offering to smuggle migrants in trucks and small boats, then facilitating their exploitation once in the UK. A senior official described these groups as vile gangs who exploit vulnerable people to make money, vowing to dismantle them piece by piece. The British government has also tried to respond on a policy level, signing agreements with France to bolster beach patrols and with Albania to streamline deportations of criminals. New laws promise tougher sentences for traffickers and gang leaders. But for all these efforts, the Albanian Mafia's grip is not easily broken. Part of the difficulty is sheer economics. As long as there is a fortune to be made from drugs and illegal migration, these gangs will keep finding recruits and new strategies to evade law enforcement. And the pipeline is self-replenishing. Many Albanians who come to the UK are not criminals. They are ordinary people seeking a better life. Yet the blanket stigma that has formed, fueled by sensationalist media coverage and even inflammatory political rhetoric calling the arrivals an invasion, often pushes these newcomers into the margins, where they can become easy prey for the criminal networks. Distrusted by society and desperate for income, some fall right into the waiting arms of the gangs who speak their language and offer under-the-table opportunities. Inside prisons, the influence is notable too. Albanians have become one of the largest foreign nationality groups in UK jails, disproportionately represented considering the relatively small size of the Albanian community in Britain. Drug convictions and trafficking cases have filled cell blocks with Albanian-speaking inmates. Some continue to run aspects of their operations from behind bars using smuggled phones. After all, their connections outside remain intact, and many have loyal subordinates ready to follow orders even if the boss is locked up. Meanwhile, on the outside, there's always someone eager to climb the ranks. Every time a crime boss is extradited or a local gang leader gets put away, a competitor or a lieutenant steps up to keep the business going. The profits are simply too large, and the ties of blood and clan too strong for the enterprise to wither easily. For Londoners living under this shadow economy, daily life goes on, but with a keen awareness of what lurks in the background. A pub owner in an area with a lot of Albanian immigrants might notice a table of quiet, muscle-bound young men who come in at odd hours, paying in cash, speaking only among themselves in Albanian, and wonder if they're part of them. A mother on the Gascoigne estate might know which blocks to steer her teenage son away from, fearing he'll be seduced or bullied by the gang hanging out there. A user looking to score cocaine in the city these days might simply call a number and have an efficient delivery made, Uber style, never realizing how many layers of gang hierarchy and exploitation were involved in getting that powder into his pocket. Late at night, in certain parts of London, you might catch a glimpse of a slick BMW with blacked-out windows idling at a street corner. Maybe you'll see a quick handoff, cash for a small packet, and the car speeds away. The streets fall quiet again, but you know that transaction is just one of hundreds happening that night, part of a vast invisible web spun by Albanian gangs. In a different neighborhood, the back room of a cafe hums with low conversation in Albanian. An older man, a community elder perhaps, pleads with some younger men to stay out of trouble, but they have already been running minor errands for the local gang, and the lure of easy money is strong. Across town, a police team executes a raid on a nondescript house. Inside, they find row upon row of cannabis plants and two half-starved Vietnamese teenagers who were locked in to tend this illegal farm, victims of another branch of this sprawling criminal enterprise. And somewhere in an Albanian village, another family says goodbye to a son or daughter heading for London, praying they'll be safe, not knowing if they're destined for honest work or to fall into the clutches of those who would exploit them. This is the underworld ecosystem that has developed, one that feeds on poverty, fear, and greed, stretching from the Balkans to Britain. The Albanian gangs in London have mastered the art of controlling the streets, not by openly claiming turf like in an old mafia movie, but through subtler means. They control through the supply of drugs, through the debts that tie people to them, through the fear they instill by the occasional act of outrageous violence as an example to all. Their power is equal parts bullet and myth, the gun that will be used if necessary, and the legend of ruthless efficiency that often means they don't even need to pull the trigger. For the vulnerable, this is a nightmare hidden in plain sight. For the gangs, it's a lucrative business model. And for the authorities and communities fighting back, it's like battling the many-headed hydra of Greek lore. Cut off one head, and two more emerge. Yet there are glimmers of hope. Each rescued trafficking victim, each major drug seizure, each conviction of a gang leader hits at their empire bit by bit. Community organizations are working to give young Albanians alternatives to the gang path and to support those who have been victimized so they aren't driven back into the hands of their abusers. Still, the struggle is far from over. As midnight approaches in London, business is just beginning for some. In the shadows of a council estate, an Albanian dealer counts a roll of cash from tonight's sales, while a few floors above, a user lies in a stupor from the product he's just bought. In a cramped bedsit across the city, a trafficked man rests aching limbs after another day of labor, wondering if he'll ever truly be free. And in the corner of a noisy pub, two gang associates whisper about the next big shipment coming in. This is the legacy that Albanian gangs have wrought on London's streets, a mix of predation and opportunism, of promises and pain. It's a world ordinarily unseen by law-abiding citizens, but its effects ripple through society in crime statistics, in hospitals treating stab wounds and overdoses, and in the silent suffering of those exploited behind closed doors. The story of how Albanian gangs came to control these streets and exploit the vulnerable is ultimately a story of power taken and abused. It's about a rise from immigrant underdogs to underworld kingpins. It's the tale of young men hardened by war and poverty, banding together in foreign lands and carving out an empire in the only way they knew, through crime. It's about communities failed by social systems, both in Albania and in Britain, becoming breeding grounds for exploitation. And it's about the symbiosis of predator and prey, gangsters who thrive on desperation and desperate people who fall under the gangsters' thrall. As dawn approaches, the city begins to stir and the gangsters of the night retreat to their bolt holes. London carries on, largely oblivious to the parallel world that exists in its midst. But the shadows remain. In those shadows, Albanian crime lords and their foot soldiers continue to run their ruthless enterprises, shaping the lives of countless people, from the addicts on the corner to the teens on the estate to the families an entire continent away. It's an immersive, unsettling reality, one where the streets of London, for all their bustle and brightness, are also hunting grounds for a criminal network that rose from distant mountains to rule by fear and fraud. This is how they control the streets, and this is how they exploit the vulnerable, in a cycle that authorities and communities are desperately working to break, even as the Albanian Mafia's story in London continues to unfold in a deadly ongoing saga.